Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a philosopher, right? So influential that Karl Marx himself called him our philosopher.
Yeah.
And Friedrich Engels even listed him alongside them, as a co-discoverer of key ideas.
Mm,
Yet most people, chances are you've probably never heard his name.
it's true.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into the mind of Josef Dietzgen. He's really the unsung architect of what he actually termed dialectical materialism.
And what's really fascinating, I think, is that, we often connect Marx with historical materialism, how societies change, and Engels with, like, the dialectics of nature.
Right.
But Dietzgen, he was laser focused on a different question.
Mm-hmm.
Fundamentally, how do we know what we know? And he tackled this from a purely materialist viewpoint. He basically set himself up as the epistemological conscience, you could say, of that early dialectical materialism, really challenging the foundations of knowledge.
So why should you, listening now, care about some 19th century German tanner who became a philosopher? Well, because Dietzgen, he wasn't just scribbling away for academics in ivory towers. Not at all. His style was actually really accessible, and that was crucial for bringing these, let's face it, complex ideas to the working class of his time. And honestly, his insights into how our brains actually function, how we form knowledge, figure out truth, even develop a moral compass, they feel surprisingly relevant today, especially with all the information overload we face.
Definitely.
We've got a good stack of his own writings here, plus some really insightful analysis to help us navigate.
So our mission, really, is to pull out the core nuggets from Dietzgen's philosophy. We'll be looking closely at his big work, The Nature of Human Brain Work.
Right.
We want to explore his ideas on knowledge, truth, science, morality, and kind of connect those dots to the bigger picture of how we all perceive and understand the world. And why, ultimately, his brand of critical thinking is maybe more essential now than ever for you.
Okay, so let's start by placing him. Where does Dietzgen fit in this whole picture? He wasn't just like a follower tagging along, was he? He came to these materialist and dialectical ideas pretty much independently.
That's exactly right. He arrived there concurrently with Marx and Engels, which is quite remarkable. His position is really unique.
So what made his approach stand out, especially to thinkers like Marx and Engels?
Well, like them, he was trying to sort of invert Hegel's dialectic, strip away what they saw as its idealist mysticism, the idea that mind or spirit is primary.
Okay.
Dietzgen wanted to ground it firmly in matter, in the physical world. But while Marx applied this mainly to history and Engels to nature, Dietzgen, he honed in almost exclusively on epistemology, the theory of knowledge. How do we know?
Oh, okay.
He's the one who actually coined the term dialectical materialism, specifically for this materialist theory of knowledge. For him, thought isn't the creator of the world, it's a product of it specifically, a product of the organized matter we call the human brain.
So it really boiled down to the brain for him. He saw the brain as a kind of tool.
Precisely. A natural organ, he called it, a Werkzeug, that's German for tool or instrument.
Right.
A tool specifically for thinking. Just like your hand is a tool for grasping, the brain is a tool for processing sense perceptions into, coherent knowledge.
Makes sense.
And he argued all thinking is fundamentally dialectical. It works by first distinguishing things, that's analysis, and then uniting them in new ways, that's synthesis.
Okay.
And this applies to everything, concepts like general and particular, cause and effect, finite, infinite. He saw these not as absolute opposites, but as interdependent relative things, aspects of the same reality constantly interacting.
Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Dietzgen was pretty harsh on what he called speculative philosophy. He basically said, look, if you try to understand the world without rooting yourself in concrete, actual experience, you're just sort of groping in the dark.
He was very critical.
Can you unpack that a bit, his distinction between that speculative approach and a more inductive one?
Yeah, this gets to a core question for him. How do we avoid what he called thoughtless thought? Ideas that just generate phantasmagories, illusions, basically, mental castles in the air.
Right.
He looked at the natural sciences, things like chemistry. They operate on empirical data, right? They reach a kind of unanimous and conscious agreement on certain facts through observation and experiment. But then you look at abstract philosophy.
Yeah.
Big questions about world conception, cause and effect, morality.
Yeah.
And it's just chaos, full of lawyers' tricks and contradictory opinions, as he put it. He even quotes Kant saying, any field where the cooperators aren't in harmony, well, it's just not on the secure road of science.
So it wasn't just about philosophers and armchairs. He thought even really sharp scientists could fall into these traps if they stepped outside their specific empirical domains,
Hmm.
like become beginners again.
Exactly. He called them tyros in philosophy.
Mm.
He pointed to someone like Alexander von Humboldt, a giant of empirical science.
Yeah, famous naturalist.
Right. Even Humboldt, while praising observation, still kind of flirted with the idea that understanding the universe through speculative and introspective reason might be this still more sublime aim.
Huh.
Dietzgen argued this whole disconnect comes from fundamentally misunderstanding how thinking actually works. Speculative philosophy, he said, often tries to bypass the evidence of the senses. It wants pure, absolutely abstract thought. It chases this absolute truth that's supposedly exalted above time and space.
Like finding truth without looking at the world.
Kind of, yeah. It often assumes we have these innate ideas ready-made in our heads, and that leads to what he called fantasy, just arbitrarily shuffling impressions around instead of grounding thought in sound common sense derived from the actual external world. It's like trying to describe a forest you've never seen.
And he felt this whole long tradition of speculative philosophy, even Hegel's really ambitious system, just sort of fizzled out, declared its own impotence.
He did. He pointed to Feuerbach's famous line, "My philosophy is no philosophy," as a kind of endpoint. But Dietzgen saw this breakdown as a good thing. Philosophy dissolving into the understanding that knowledge is inherently impure. It always needs a starting point, an object, something outside itself to work on.
Okay.
The secret to avoiding those idle speculative wanderings, he concluded, was the simple realization that every thought requires an object, a premise. You can't just think about thinking in a vacuum. Your thoughts need traction on reality, on experience. Otherwise, yeah, you're just building fantasies. It's a powerful call for grounding.
Okay, let's try and bring these powerful ideas down to earth a bit more. Give us some concrete examples. How did Dietzgen apply this materialist way of knowing to something fundamental like, say, cause and effect?
Right, good question. Looking at the bigger picture, Dietzgen said objective science figures out causes a posteriori, meaning after the fact, through experience, through induction, not a priori, just thinking about it.
So observation first.
Exactly. He was very critical of the tendency we have to imagine unscientific forces, sort of supernatural things, or little gods hiding behind events. For him, investigating a cause simply means generalizing from a bunch of observations, arranging the multiplicity of experienced facts under one scientific rule. It's about identifying a pattern, not finding a hidden spirit pulling strings.
Like the classic example. A stone falls into water, makes ripples. How would he see that?
Precisely. He'd say the stone itself isn't the cause in itself. The cause is the contact, the interaction of the stone with the water in its liquid state.
Ah, the interaction.
Yes, and then those ripples, they become a cause themselves when they, say, push a piece of cork to the shore. Everything in the world, he argued, exists in this constant mutual effect, this interaction.
Okay.
So the very concept of cause is a product of our reason, but not pure reason floating free. It's reason married to the world of sense perceptions. So when someone like Kant says every change has its cause, Dietzgen hears that not as some pre-existing absolute truth in our minds, but as an expression of how our brains naturally work. The development of the general element out of the concrete facts is called reason, thought, or mind. Our brains are built to look for those general rules in the messy, concrete reality we experience.
That makes a lot of sense. We're pattern-finding machines, essentially, connecting the dots based on what we see and touch.
You could put it that way, yeah.
So what about that huge philosophical debate? Matter versus mind. The physical stuff versus our thoughts, consciousness. Where did Dietzgen land on that?
Well, he saw that whole separation, the idealist split between matter and mind, as basically an artificial contradiction, a kind of philosophical trick.
How so?
He believed the spiritual is material and the material at the same time spiritual. For him, mind isn't some ghost in the machine. He'd say, mind is as real as the tangible table, as the visible light, as the audible sound.
Wow, okay.
And that superior spiritual ideal stuff people like to contrast with material interests. He saw that as just a special part of those interests. It all arises from the material world and our interactions with it.
So science, then, isn't about perfectly mirroring nature.
Not exactly. He thought science was about carrying a new element into matter, which is our understanding of its general character, its patterns. The emancipation of the mind from the bonds of matter, for him, wasn't about escaping physicality. It was about developing the general element out of the concrete multiplicity of sense perceptions. understanding the rules of the game, not leaving the game.
So if I'm tracking this right, the essence of things, or truth in itself, that's not some hidden, timeless reality out there waiting to be discovered. It's something our brains construct.
That's a really good way to frame it. He explicitly said the essence, the nature of things, the thing itself, is an ideal, a spiritual conception. Our brain takes this flood, this infinite variety of sense perceptions, and it abstracts the general likeness out of the concrete forms, organizing them for our consciousness.
Can you give an example?
Think about, okay, the color of a leaf. That's an attribute, right? And the leaf is an attribute of the tree. The tree is an attribute of the earth. He extends this out. The universe is the substance in general, and all other substances are but its attributes.
Okay.
The thing itself, the essence, isn't hiding behind the phenomena. You find it by means of the phenomena, by seeing the patterns. So for Dietzgen, truth is that which is common or general to our reasoning faculty within a given circle of sense perceptions.
Within a given circle, that sounds important.
It is. And error. Error happens when we mistakenly assign to any definite fact a wider and more general existence than is supported by sense perceptions and experience. You find a truth that works in one specific context, and you try to apply it everywhere, even where it doesn't fit the observations.
That's profound. But I can hear someone thinking, wait, if truth is just what's common within a certain circle, doesn't that just mean anything goes? Pure relativism. How did he deal with that?
That's a fair challenge, and he definitely addresses it. The key is that given circle of sense perceptions, truth isn't just whatever I happen to believe right now. It's what our collective human brains, interacting with the concrete world, discover as generally applicable within a specific domain.
So it's tied to evidence and function.
Exactly. It's a pragmatic view. Think about the truth that a hammer is good for hitting nails. That truth is relative to the function of hammering nails. It's not good for stirring soup. But within that function, it's a pretty solid, verifiable truth based on experience. It's relative, but not arbitrary.
Okay, that clarifies things. Now, this critique of absolute truth, this insistence on concrete experience, that must have massive implications for morality and ethics. How did Dietzgen apply this thinking to what he called practical reason?
Oh, absolutely. This is where he really shakes up a lot of traditional assumptions. He argued, look, just like there aren't objects that are in themselves big or small, hard or soft, these are relative terms, right?
Yeah, depends what you compare them to.
Exactly. Similarly, there are no absolutely reasonable good or right actions in some abstract void. These terms always denote relations. They need a certain standard by which their relations can be determined. And here's the kicker. He declared that man with his many wants is the standard of moral truth.
Wow, so morality isn't decreed from heaven or found in pure reason, but it bubbles up from actual human needs and desires, and that means it has to be relative to those needs and the specific situation.
Precisely. He points to the huge differences in moral codes across history and cultures. Pagan, Christian, feudal, modern bourgeois societies, as he lists them.
Right, they valued very different things.
Think about a law like thou shalt not kill. He'd say, well, that's generally right in peace, but wrong in war.
Right.
Or robbery seems right to the robber, wrong to the robbed. These aren't absolute evils stamped by the universe, but wrong in a relative sense, depending on the context and who you ask.
So the idea of one single absolutely right law that works for everyone, everywhere, forever.
He saw that as futile. Why? Because human welfare is as different as men, circumstances, and time. What is good, he stated very plainly, is what corresponds to our needs. What is bad is what runs contrary to them.
That's a really radical rethinking. It might make some people uncomfortable looking for those fixed moral anchors. What about that tricky maxim, the end sanctifies the means? That usually sounds pretty cynical.
Yeah, it often does. But Dietzgen actually wanted to rehabilitate the truth and reasonableness of this maxim, not as a blank check for doing terrible things, but as an observation about how we actually judge actions.
How so?
He saw end and means as super-relative terms, just like great and small. From the widest possible angle, human welfare is the ultimate end of all ends. And in that sense, it sanctifies all rules and actions, all means, so long as they are subservient to it.
Okay, but that sounds potentially dangerous.
Right. And here's the crucial caveat. He immediately stresses that this welfare is an abstraction. Its real content is as different as are the times, the nations, or persons which are seeking for their welfare.
Ah, so whose welfare and defined how?
Exactly. So no particular means is holy in itself. It's only sanctified by definite relations. His example. If peace is your sanctified means to welfare, then war is unholy. But if a group believes their salvation or welfare lies through war, then murder and incendiarism are holy means to that specific end. It forces you to look at the actual context, the stated goals, however uncomfortable that might be.
So for Dietzgen, the moral truth of an action isn't floating in some ideal realm. It's right here in the mud and mess of the concrete situation, judged by its connection to actual human needs and welfare in that context.
Yeah, that's a powerful idea. It puts a lot of responsibility on us to understand the context.
It really does. He states it clearly. A morality worthy of that name can be exercised only through the understanding of its worth, of its value for our welfare, of its usefulness. The whole idea of absolute right, he called it a meaningless concept.
And claiming your own goals and methods are for the absolute welfare of humanity.
Yeah.
He saw that as potentially a disastrous deception. Instead, he says, face it, the mutability of that which is right, holy, moral, is a natural, necessary, and true fact. Things change.
And accepting that leads to?
It leads to what he saw as real freedom. The consciousness of individual freedom emancipates us from striving for an illusory absolute ideal and restores us to the definite practical interests of our time and personality. That, for Dietzgen, is practical reason, engaging with the real needs and conditions here and now, not chasing impossible, abstract perfection.
What an incredible journey through Josef Dietzgen's thought. We've really seen how his focus, his intense focus on the material brain work, how we actually make knowledge from perception, it really threw down a gauntlet to centuries of speculative philosophy.
He certainly did.
And it offers this profoundly practical way to look at everything, truth, science, even our deepest moral values.
Yeah, looking at the big picture, I think Dietzgen's real legacy is forcing us to stop searching for some absolute panacea or eternal truths, completely outside our lived experience.
Right.
He wants us to understand that all knowledge, all morality, all these truths we talk about, they are parts of this world, partial truths. They're constructed by our brains, processing the complex, concrete realities around us, always within limits of time, space, and crucially, human needs.
He taught us the world just is. Whatever exists is right and is not fated to be otherwise until it changes. The real value isn't finding some fixed, abstract endpoint, but engaging in that conscious, ongoing process of finding the general patterns within this ever-changing, incredibly varied concrete world. It's really a call for empirical, critical thinking, and maybe even a kind of tolerance born from understanding the relative applicability of eternal truths.
And that really does raise a final important question for you listening right now. In this world we live in, just flooded with information, competing claims, people shouting about absolute truth, what might happen if you adopted Dietzgen's kind of rigorous, materialist approach?
Yeah.
If you started seeing truth as what's common in general within a defined circle of perceptions, how might that change the way you engage with new information, how you evaluate different viewpoints, and maybe even how you decide what's good or right in your own life?
That is definitely a thought-provoking challenge to mull over long after this deep dive is done. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of Josef Dietzgen, a really crucial thinker, but yeah, often overlooked in the history of philosophy.
It was a pleasure.
Until next time, keep digging, keep questioning, and definitely keep thinking for yourself.